Now hand over to the candidates to introduce themselves, starting with Matt. Thank you very much.
Hello, good evening. My name is Matt Patterson. I'm standing to be the Labour Party Member of Parliament for Beaconsfield. For those of you that don't know me, I'm from around here. I grew up in South Bucks. My family have kind of lived here for as long as anyone knows. Went to a local grammar school, was born in a local hospital. My kids go to local schools. These woods, the hills, the valleys and the towns, they're my home just as much as they're your home. My experience is that I've worked all over the world. I worked in the British Treasury during the financial crisis when we worked to save the banks. I worked overseas doing aid work in some fairly tough and challenging countries. And I also most recently worked as a diplomat for the Commonwealth, trying to kind of protect some of the most vulnerable states in the world from the effects of climate change. But that's not just the only reason I'm standing. The reason I'm standing is that my family needs change. I've got a very, very kind of, needy son, basically, who relies upon the NHS and upon the state working, and it's not working. So I'd like you to vote for me so that we can see change in this country. Thank you very much.
In 2019, I made a series of promises to the people of Beaconsfield, and I have kept those promises. I said I would move to the constituency, and I have. I said I would defend the Greenbelt, and I have. At every opportunity, I have personally objected. I have actually objected to everything across the constituency and stopped the Holtspur development and was able to complete the road to nowhere. I worked with the MOD, with Inland Homes, with HS2 to find that solution. It took 2 years. I promised I would do it at this Hustings in 2019, and I did. I have kept my promises. I said I would defend grammar schools, and I have. And I said I would oppose a third runway at Heathrow, and I did. I have kept my promises to the people of Beaconsfield, and if re-elected, I will continue to be your local community champion. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is John Halsall. I'm your Reform candidate. The Tories have broken the UK. Labour has always left office with the UK bankrupt and will do so again. Labour will build in the Green Belt and is institutionally against selective schools. The Lib Dems will infantilise the UK. A vote for either is a vote for more incompetence, dishonesty and defeat. The alternative is reform. Only reform will stand up for our culture, identity and values. The government must work for the people. Once and for all, reform will take back control of our borders, our money and our laws. Only reform will secure the UK's future as a proud, free, wealthy and independent nation. If elected, I will defend Beaconsfield's interests above all else. I will help to regain the good sense, common sense, good governance and competence for which we used to be renowned throughout the world. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Pippa Allen and I am an independent candidate for Beaconsfield. As an independent MP, I will work for you, not a political party. I know what a woman is and I'm not afraid to say so. I'm a qualified solicitor specialising in social justice and I am a campaigner. I grew up in Bourne End and attended High March School here in Beaconsfield before passing the 11 plus and going on to Wickham High. So my father was not a tool maker. My father was a bank manager right here in Beaconsfield in the new town in the iconic NatWest building, which is closing next month. My mother was a music teacher at High March and Becky High, and my parents brought me up with traditional conservative values, some of which I agreed with and some of which I did not. As a bank manager, my father was instrumental in supporting countless local people, the self-starters, the entrepreneurs, setting up small businesses, which then flourished and were the backbone of the local economy and the community. It's this community that I want to serve and stand up against the chancers who tell us they are the ones that will bring a fair deal, change and reform. They won't. Vote for me, vote for democracy.
Good evening. I'm sure many of you are wondering how your sons ended up on stage. But my name is Cole Caesar, and I'm standing also as another independent candidate for this election. I live in Burnham, and I've lived in Burnham since 2007, and I currently am working in the housing industry, which has been about 4.5 years now, which gives me great insight of the issues and loopholes regarding legislation. The reason why I've chosen to stand as an independent candidate is because I've seen the lack of concern, the false promises with no answer on where funding is coming from, the childish and aggressive behaviour that MPs attack one another, and enough's enough. I want to express my views without being restricted by a political party. I want to say what I want to say truthfully and how I want to say it, and that's what I will do tonight. I want to stand beside you, not behind you in this election, which is most important to me. And I leave you with this statement: the smallest acorn grows the biggest tree. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Dominic Pegram and I'm representing the Green Party. 29 years ago, Emma and I got married in this church. At that time, we made some vows to each other. We vowed that we would be honest, we would love, we would honour, and we would protect each other. I'm here to make those same vows to you. I will be honest with you and expose and condemn the lies and trickery of modern-day politics. I will love those who are discriminated against and come here just so they can have a better life. I will honour the people of Beaconsfield who have been so generous in welcoming me and my family to Beaconsfield for over 35 years. I will do my best to protect the planet, nature, and social values. I'm the Green Party. Vote for the Green Party. Vote for hope. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Anna Crabtree, and I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate. I've lived in this constituency, in Little Marlow and Bourne End, for the last 8 years, and throughout that time, I've been involved in my local community. My children are at school in Marlow, I'm a parish councillor, I've been a school governor, and I sit on the board of Buckinghamshire University, where I've chaired the Resources Committee, which fits well with my professional background as a chartered accountant. But I joined the Lib Dems because I felt let down by our Conservative government. Over the last decade, it really does feel as if they've broken Britain. They've destroyed politics, destroyed our trust, they've crippled our economy and our NHS. They're turning our rivers into sewers, and enough is enough. The Lib Dems have been the only party consistently challenging the Conservatives here, winning by-elections and coming second in every other one. If you feel it's time for a fresh start, I'm the only individual here who can genuinely deliver change for our area. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. Now we can go on with the questions. We're going to start with Joy and then work our way down that way and finish up with Matt. So the first question is on the topic of trust and integrity. The Cross-Party Parliamentary Privileges Committee found Boris Johnson guilty of misleading Parliament by deliberately lying to the House of Commons. Our MP was one of only 7 who voted against this censure. We've had Partygate, numerous MPs losing the whip for misconduct, and now betting on the election date. What will you do to restore trust and integrity to the House of Commons?
So I campaigned on local promises to be a local champion, and I took those extremely seriously. I took all the promises that I said I would do as a local champion for the area, and I have done them. I have stood up for the Green Belt. I have stood up for all of the issues that I promised that I would do. I am. So I also believe in democracy and the parliamentary privilege that you are allowed to exercise as a member of parliament. For the Privileges Committee, when I voted against that, Boris had already left. He actually called and asked me to not vote against it. He actually asked me to abstain. I didn't vote for it for Boris Johnson. I voted for it because the Privileges report included things that would restrict parliamentary freedom, would restrict MPs' ability to speak publicly and defend issues in their community, and I wanted to make sure that it was safeguarded for democracy. The people that voted for the final 7 were not actually even in the Boris supporting camp. They were people that wanted to support democracy and democratic freedom for MPs to speak freely and stand up for their constituents. And I believe in that, and I believe in protecting MPs' right to speak freely for their constituents. If we didn't have that, you wouldn't have things like the Rotherham gangs wouldn't have been exposed. You wouldn't have had the parliamentary privilege that you've seen where people speak out on issues that people are being abused. So that is why it had to do with parliamentary
Time for the
democracy
next
and
speaker,
nothing else.
please.
Thank you.
It's an interesting question. If you're a student of history, you will know that our politics have always been chaotic. It's a cornerstone of the adversarial system. And it's important that they're chaotic because that's the way you determine the truth of any argument. Churchill said that our democracy is a dreadful system, but it's the best one that anybody has ever tried. Having said that, all the layers of control which are being put in are actually not making any difference. If I'm elected to as your MP, I will certainly behave as you would wish me to, and I will be responsible to you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one of the reasons I decided to stand, because I have felt politically homeless for quite some time. I think trust in politics is at an all-time low. I think the infighting within parties, the self-obsessed dramas, the broken pledges, and just the out-and-out dishonesty has just really let us down and let the country down. Under the Tories, we've seen small businesses also come under attack with a loss of civil liberties and freedoms. And I think it's really important to protect those and to stop government interference and overreach when they're behaving exactly how they want to behave, but yet impose all these restrictions on us. And I think, people talk about tactical voting, but I think that's a waste of time. What kind of choice is it when we have to vote for the least worst option? That's no choice at all. That's why I'm standing as an independent, to offer a real alternative.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Pippa. It's a very good question on the basis of MPs should be elected to do a job because they're elected by you guys. They're not elected, they don't feel like they have more power. And what we're seeing is, I think MPs are actually just there for the money. That's the most important thing. And they need to be there to actually serve the community and feel like they want to do something good. And I believe that there are things that we can do to make MPs be more trusted by people. I think, firstly, I will campaign and push for making all MPs' financial records public. We see a lot of backhanders, we see a lot of problems with MPs, a lot of the cases that come up, and there's other things. And I'm going to act, as I said in my opening speech, I want to stand beside you, not in front of you, because that is what's important to myself. You guys are the ones who make up this community, not me. I want every issue that we speak on tonight, solutions and ideas that I've come up with are from people who are in the industry, the professionals, the doctors, the teachers. Those are the people who know what the problems are, and that's what we need to be listening about for. Thank you.
Hi, well, firstly, I'm not going to put a bet on whether Jo would speak longer than she should have done. But I think one of the advantages of being in the Green Party is that we can actually afford to tell you the truth. And I don't think that we are going to be fooled by the idea that you're going to solve all the problems by tinkering around with welfare. I don't think we're going to solve all the problems by relying on growth, which is stagnated, which is only, bravo, we got to 0.7% today. The truth is, you're going to have to pay some tax. The people who are wealthy are going to have to pay some tax. And if we're not honest with you, then we're going to always be incredible. Thank you.
So I'm not here as a career politician. I'm here as a local resident, an accountant, a school mum. I'm just somebody who lives in this area and wants better representation for us. But when I studied my accountancy exams, I had to take an ethics paper, and we had to learn about the Nolan principles of public life. And we had to learn how important it was for people to be accountable and honest and have integrity. If I had to do that exam to be an accountant, why shouldn't MPs have to sign up to that as well? It's absolutely essential. So I'm proud of the fact that in the Lib Dem manifesto, we have written that we would like the Nolan principles to be enshrined in the ministerial code, and that should be part of legislation. It should be something that all ministers have to sign up to and should be forced to stick to it. Thank you.
So I get it, actually. It's been a really awful couple of years in politics, and I feel kind of really disappointed in politics. But I do want to say something that was said. It's not always been like this. It's not always been chaotic. And don't fall for that trick. That's the trick that disavows you, gets you to disavow politicians and walk away from the field. And that's when people like the Reform Party win, by making you scared and disgusted with politicians. There are good people in the House of Commons. I've worked for some of them. I worked for Alistair Darling. He was an amazing man, and I kind of deeply cared for him. And I would say the Labour Party is coming back to the party that he was involved in. Keir Starmer's changed our party, and we will change politics if we get in. But don't listen to the siren voices that tell you that nothing can change, that it's hopeless, that all politicians are the same. They're not. Labour has changed, and if we get into government, we will kind of work absolutely tirelessly to try and improve this country and to restore faith in politics. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. The second question is on the question of Greenbelt, and it will go to John first and work around the loop. So here goes. You have all stated that you oppose Greenbelt development. Apart from writing letters to the council, how will you work in Westminster to protect our Greenbelt, and in particular, what will you do to stop the Beaches Park development and stop expansion of the Springfield Farm landfill site? Thank you.
Greenbelt. Beaconsfield is blessed with a load of greenbelt. In fact, the whole of the constituency is leafy. And there are two things which are fundamental. It's the Greenbelt and selective education, both of which the Labour Party has promised to dismantle. I was leader of Woking Borough Council and campaigned extensively to protect the Greenbelt in Woking. And the second part of the question is on the beaches development. And the beaches development is next to Wilton Park and would be a disaster. I've read the appeal and the comments by the inspector, and it was absolutely sound in knocking the beaches development on the head. Thank you.
So yeah, greenbelt development, I mean, it's an oxymoron, isn't it? I don't quite know how it's come to this, where we're talking about developing on our greenbelt, which we all thought was sacrosanct. I will do everything I can to protect the greenbelt because it's our buffer against urban sprawl, and it maintains our identities in our towns and villages, and I think it's a really important commodity that we have here. And as John says, we're blessed with it. So the Beaches Park, again, it's Catesby Estates, isn't it? I mean, they're responsible for the Hollands farm development as well. And they seem to have picked us, aren't we lucky? And they've got their BDI on all sorts of places to develop. I will fight against these developments. I don't think it's in the public interest. I don't think it suits our housing need. I think there needs to be a proper analysis of what these developers are offering. The one in Hollands Farm, they've just put in a school in the development because it looks good. It's not actually needed there. So we need to properly assess what is needed in our areas. And then very quickly on Springfield Farm, it's a regulating issue. I have to stop now, I'm sorry.
Well, I think it's simple with the Greenbelt is we have so many loopholes in our legal system regarding, and this is, I mean, I work in the property industry and I actually work alongside developers. Well, I don't work with them, but I know them and cooperate with them, and they actually know the loopholes to get around councils and planning to actually build or get some sort of approval on Greenbelt. So we need to abolish some of the legal paperwork regarding that. I'm going to skip through this quick. So Beaches Park, I think it's just, I am definitely opposing this. Catesby, they've actually, if you actually look at their website, they clearly, for someone who likes to look at developments on Greenbelt, this is clearly not acceptable, and I would look at fighting that within council, and as well as fighting that alongside council as well. And then the landfill, again, is something that I oppose on the extension of the 20 years to 2044, I believe, that they wanted to extend to. So I oppose that itself. Thank you.
All right. Well, I mean, it's not going to be any great surprise that the Green Party are against developing on the green belt. Let's be clear. Oh, there's a bit of politician bingo. Let's be clear that Catesby Estate, they smell blood. They think that if they can spend an awful lot of money, that's going to be enough to convince anyone that that is a development that's worth having. And let's be clear, they are not going to provide affordable housing because they never do. It's not in their interest to provide rentable social housing because there's no money in that. So what I would do is I would recognise that the expertise is in this building. Give the people of the Bexark the power to actually work with the neighbourhood plan so that the local council and the developers can't drive a bus through it. Thank you.
This is a huge topic, obviously, to try and cover in 60 seconds. So I'll start by saying that I'm a founder member of Save Marlowe's Greenbelt. I was involved in collecting hundreds of letters that we sent to the Secretary of State to object to Bucks Council trying to sell off Greenbelt land near Ivor. I've also had discussions with Colne Valley about how they'd really like to look at reforming the NPPF to make sure that it takes much better account of Greenbelt and habitats and areas that need to be preserved. But I really think that the key to doing the Beaches Park development properly and sorting out the Springfield landfill site is to be asking the local people. It's such a shame at the moment that there isn't a local plan for South Bucks, that there isn't yet a neighbourhood plan in Beaconsfield, and it's not been done properly, potentially. And I really would like to see community-led development where everybody gets asked, where do you need housing, where do you need doctors, where do you have problems with traffic, and have the community help solve those problems by getting a real neighbourhood plan in place so you get the development you need and the assets that you need without having to sacrifice Greenbelt. Thank you.
So there are three things that the Labour Party created when it was in government in 1945. That's the NHS, NATO, and the Green Belt. We're proud of that. We are going to introduce a golden rule in government, which will protect communities and nature, which will make sure that communities are involved in development. And Keir Starmer's been very clear about what that means. When we're talking about grey belt and all that kind of stuff, he's talking about car parks and wilderness land, old industrial sites. So don't let people scare you that we're going to bulldoze over the green belt. It's not true. It's the politics of fear. On the estate, off the road to nowhere, as I think we all kind of know it colloquially. By the way, that was almost like a community asset for a bit. We could all take our kids up there, go skateboarding. It's almost a shame it opened. The real shame it opened is that actually that decision by the Conservative Council, by Martin Tet, friends with Troy, when they opened up that road, that meant that Beaches was up for options. So you have to ask, you've got a Tory council, a Tory government, and a Tory MP, and they're still opening up areas for development. And they're going to tell you that they're protecting them. Protecting them from who? Themselves?
So you asked me to change the law about housing number targets for councils. Stuart, you were the first one to do it with the Hollands Farm. I worked with you on that. And actually, Beaconsfield Society, you asked me to do it. We did change the law. I lobbied relentlessly. Greg Smith and I worked on this amendment, and we were able to get it accepted by the government. So the Conservatives are the only ones who have scrapped housing numbers and requirements for councils, which is where the pressure was coming from. We were successful in that. I was successful in delivering that. We've also scrapped the duty to cooperate, which meant stopping Slough having the ability to build houses in Stoke Poges and in our Greenbelt, because that's what they were saying. That's what they were coming for. In 2017, they had a plan to build in our Greenbelt. I have stopped it. I have promised to deliver this, and I actually did. So I've changed the law. I can't say what will happen under another government, but I have changed the legislation for you to protect your interest here in Beaconsfield. And I've also objected to both of those planning applications.
The next question is on the topic of the environment. The Beaconsfield constituency is essentially a rural community. If you are elected to government, what are the key pledges that you will instigate to protect our environment and our wildlife? That's to Pippa.
Thank you. Yeah, I think one of the key issues in this constituency and Beaconsfield is sewage and how that is damaging our environment. I think the way that we can address that is by accepting that privatisation with our water companies has not worked. I think we really need to look beyond giving regulators more powers. I mean, yes, they could have more powers that they use, but what's that going to be? Just fines? I mean, if you look at Thames Water, they are 19 billion in debt. You know, what's another fine to them? Will it make any difference? I think we really need to look at renationalising the water companies and put it back into public ownership, and then we can really start to make improvements. Thames Water are falling apart at the seams. You know, they're dealing with crumbling assets and insufficient infrastructure. It really needs a complete overhaul. Thank you.
Look like I'm copying now, but yeah, my top priority would be the sewage in the rivers as well. Obviously, I live in Burnham, so I have some issues with Dorney and the rivers around there, and you have issues up here. It's throughout the whole constituency. So this is something that I take dearly to heart, that we need to sort out the sewage in our rivers, and we need to, as Pippa said, we need to hold these water companies accountable for what they are doing, and they're getting away with it. We need to be changing Ofwat. We need to be getting more funding towards the environmental agencies, giving them more power, so that they can hold these companies to account themselves, and we can then start making changes within these water companies. I do kind of agree with Pippa on the basis of nationalising water, but we have to be realistic on the funding issue. There are funding that this country does give away, like the NHS has a lot of waste still spending, and we have a lot of foreign aid going out of the country, which could potentially be spent back on nationaling our energy and water. But most importantly, I want to just hold these companies to account on the sewage and the waters. Thank you.
Of course, sewage is a massive issue, but I'm not going to concentrate on that particularly. The UK wildlife has depleted 19% since 1970. That's 43% of all bird life has disappeared from the UK since 1970. My approach would be to enforce the new Climate and Nature Bill, which is brought to Parliament by Caroline Lucas and also a Labour Party, Alex Sodal, which looks to restrict global warming to 1.5%. Well, it's already 1.6, so we're stuck with that. But also return 30% of the land and sea back to nature. And given that we first contemplated this in Paris in 2015, we're only 6% there, and we have committed to the 30% in 2030. Ooh, thank you. So my idea, or the idea of the Climate and Nature Bill, is to give local climate assemblies the power to implement the Climate and Nature Bill.
I also support the Climate and Nature Bill, so thank you, Dominic, for mentioning that. And the Lib Dems have got policies to improve biodiversity by giving special status to particular habitats such as salt marshes and peat bogs and chalk streams, which brings us back to the sewage. The Lib Dems are strongly of the opinion that we should be stopping dumping sewage into our rivers. We should be turning the companies into public benefit corporations. I'm slightly worried that Joy's going to stand up and tell you that the Lib Dems haven't costed the 600 billion that she was saying last week that it's going to cost to fix the sewage dumping. That's not true. The number is actually 60 billion. And as it's not our asset, it's not our job to pay for it. These are currently corporations that should be making a profit and fixing their own assets. So it's not something that the Lib Dems should be costing or expecting the taxpayer to pay for. We'd like to create 3 new national parks, including one in the Chilterns. And it's also really important that we're doing everything we can to prevent climate change. So I'd like to see 60 million trees being planted every year. Thank you.
That's okay. As I said, this is my home. I grew up playing in these rivers. I used to work on a local farm. It's nice to see Alex Sobel referenced, a local boy, someone who stood to be the MP for Beaconsfield and someone I hope is a friend. But yeah, Labour's very committed to the environment on all types of levels. We're going to plant new national forests. We are going to absolutely tackle the water companies by holding them to account, not by buying them up, but by making sure that there are sanctions, including criminal sanctions on the bosses, so that we actually get them to pay for the damage that they've made, rather than nationalising the cost of that damage. And on climate change, we're going to return to leadership on this. Our Great British Energy is going to absolutely kind of transform the energy sector in this country so that we can actually get cheaper cheaper energy and not rely on gas from people like Putin. So we've got and the best thing about the Labour Party is actually that we're going to turn us to the national stage, international stage, and actually lead on climate globally. And for me, that's the most important thing, because this is a global issue that we need global solutions for. Thank you.
60 billion, 600 billion, 6 billion, £6. I would have been happy with anything if the Lib Dems had actually costed the cost of actually improving the storm overflow and the sewage capacity. It will cost billions because it needs to be replaced. It's old, it's been there since the Victorian times. I have put in a bid. I've worked for 3 years on the Farnham Common Sewage Action Group and the Little Marlow Sewage Action Group, because we need to restore, we need to put in new storm overflow capacity. And we have changed the law so that we have unlimited fines now for water companies. We have unlimited fines. We can actually take away their permits and their license to operate, full stop. We can also monitor now 100%. Before we came into power, there was 7% monitoring. So you might not have known it, but there was still, this is not a new problem. It has been going on since the sewage was created, since the the Victorian sewage was created, but we are actually solving the problem with storm overflow. We have a bid in for Little Marlow and a bid in for Beaconsfield. So I have tried to tackle the problem. It does cost money, but that's important for public investment in infrastructure.
It's a huge question, but in answering the question, we have to give cognizance to the fact that we're broke. So all the parties who are promising spending lots and lots of money will not do it without taxing you to your eyeballs. It's just not possible. We're broke. So all the promises have to be tempered with what we can afford, particularly net zero. Net zero mustn't be an altar in which we sacrifice the national wealth. We need to pursue the biodiversity goals, which the current government is doing so. And on sewage, it's a very simple question as to why we're here where we're here. I go swimming in the Thames for 6 months a year, and I go rowing every morning. And it's disgusting. But as loads of houses have been built, the sewage has not been increased. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. The next topic is education. And we will be starting with Cole this time. Do you think that grammar schools should be retained in Buckinghamshire? And if so, should they be rolled out further across the UK? More generally, at what point will government see education as an investment instead of a cost?
Well, quickly on the grammar situation, no. I'm not clever. There's a lot of people that I know aren't clever enough to pass 11 plus. So I think that rolling out grammar schools is just another pointless scenario. We need to be looking at focusing more on our public schools. And this area has a problem with secondary schools, you know, Burnham, Ivor, and it also puts stress on the secondary schools here in Beaconsfield because there isn't enough. There are issues that I do think the government don't look at it as a priority, or they put it to the side as just an expense. They're more focused on the NHS and other issues, which of course are important, but the people who need the education could be the ones in the future to make the improvements. So I think that we need to be looking at our education more importantly, and that's something that I will look to do. I'd love to say as much tonight, but there's loads of things that I think need to be improved within schools, including the actual way the schools are spending themselves, that we can then start improving. I mean, teachers to pay for their own pen and pencils for their students is unbelievable. Thank you.
One of the difficulties of standing up and saying that you're going to be brutally honest with everyone is that actually I now have to be brutally honest. I have a difficult relationship with grammar schools. Both my sons went to Dr. Challoner's. It was amazing for them. My dad went to a grammar school in Walthamstow, and that transformed his life. But my personal relationship with it, in terms of my sister and me, I passed my 11 plus, and she didn't. She failed. And our lives went in such completely different direction. She has labelled herself, and I don't know if everyone else has, but she labelled herself as a failure when she was 11 years old. I went to university. She didn't go to university. I have a really lovely house in Jordan's. She lives in a mobile home. We have very different lives. So I find it, I don't have a binary position. I find it complicated.
So speaking personally, I am in favour of grammar schools. My daughter's just about to start at one. But what I'm absolutely clear on, having just been through this as a family, is that the 11 plus system is deeply flawed. It's very difficult testing 10-year-olds and expecting what happens on one day, as Dominic mentioned, deciding their academic future. So we're very lucky in this area to have excellent schools. But not all parts of the constituency are as fortunate. And I do think this is something that needs to be addressed so that all children can have the best education possible. The Lib Dems are committed to increasing the spending on schools. I've been a school governor, I've chaired a finance committee at a school, and I know how hard it is to make the budgets balance when there's not enough funding coming in. And I also would like to say at this point that not taxing education is also a point of principle for the Lib Dems, because I don't think that's the way to fix problems. I don't think we should be introducing VAT on private schools. I think we should be providing the best education possible to all of our children, because that will actually be investing in our future. Academic investment leads to economic success. Thank you.
As a man who once stood in this constituency said, education, education, education. And actually the Labour Party is absolutely committed to investing in education. We are looking to put 6,500 new skills teachers in, so that's maths and science teachers into schools. We've fully funded it, as a whole manifesto is fully funded. And we used to invest in our schools, and it's incredibly important. We're going to be putting mental health hubs in schools to support kids, a lot of whom, like my kids, have been through COVID and kind of lost big learning opportunities and haven't got the social skills. And we're going to basically give new training and reinvest in our education system because it's absolutely essential. All grammar schools, I went to grammar school. My dad went to grammar school, my grandma went to grammar school. When I went, there was a low proportion of people who went to grammar school who were from out of county and who were kind of privately educated before they arrived. And if I'm quite honest, as a parent now looking at my kids, who are probably going to take the 11 plus in a couple of years' time, the system doesn't feel fair for local people at the moment. It feels like it's being gamed so hard. It's not Labour Party policy to get rid of grammar schools, but I do think we need the system to work for local people because it doesn't feel like it is at the moment. Thank you.
Yes, I support grammar schools. Yes, I support them being rolled out across England. Yes, I support apprenticeships. And yes, I support parental choice and opportunity. And that is why I am opposed to the VAT increase and raid on parents for independent schools. It should be your choice to send your child where you want to send them. And I believe in opportunity. I'm also opposed, and I want to protect same-sex spaces for women and girls as well. Because I know what a woman is. I'm not sure if the Labour Party does.
The Shadow Chancellor said she has and always will always oppose selective schools. So in 2018, this includes grammar schools and private schools. Thank you, Matt. So your grammar schools and independent schools are at risk. The Labour Party has been very clear on VAT on independent schools. It is a cornerstone of Buckinghamshire, the quality of the schools. So take care. We also need to look at the maintained schools. The consequences of Gove was that the buildings are looked after by no one. And the freedom of choice has led to huge transport bills for the local councils, particularly for SEND schools. So the whole schooling system needs reform, but not the grammar schools and independent schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, all children need access to quality education, whether that's grammar schools, which I'm in favour of, I went to one, or whether it's something else. It's down to what that child needs, and it is down to parental choice. We haven't spoken about tuition fees. That's in the area of education. I don't know if you know what the interest rate is on student loans at the moment. It is 7.8%. Yeah, it's shocking. It's enormous. We'd love to have that on our savings accounts, wouldn't we? But no, we're not benefiting from it. Our children aren't benefiting from it. They're getting absolutely screwed on tuition fees. Lib Dems, I'm looking at you. Yeah, thank you. So I think we really need to do something about either abolishing tuition fees or bringing that interest rate on student loans right down. And about single-sex spaces, don't be fooled by Joy here jumping on the bandwagon at the 11th hour. This has happened under the Conservatives, okay, this rollback on women's and girls' rights, okay, and sex spaces. So just be wary when people jump on the bandwagon just because it's a vote winner.
Candidates. The next topic is health. These are some very meaty topics. I do appreciate that 60 seconds isn't very much to address them. We'll go first to Dom this time. The IFS, that's the Institute for Fiscal Studies, has stated that both Labour and Conservatives are proposing NHS improvements that are up to £18 billion per year more than the declared costings. Will you be honest about how much our taxes will really have to rise to fix the NHS?
Well, I think in my opening speech, I said that yes, we're going to be honest. It's going to cost we've committed the Green Party to a 50 billion investment in the NHS, and we're honest with you that is going to cost. But it's going to cost 1% of the multimillionaires. Their income over £10 million. Then it's 2% over £10 million of assets. I don't know who thinks that isn't fair if that's the price to pay. Really? Oh, well, I would happily pay it. If I was lucky enough to be a multimillionaire, I'd be happy to pay that extra 1%. But there is also a degree of wastage that we have to acknowledge within the NHS. Agency nursing is currently costing us £4 billion a year. That's £400 million is going to the agency, and that's 10,000 extra nurses.
So as Alison said, this is a very complex topic to try and cover in 60 seconds, but the Lib Dems have pledged not to increase taxes on regular working families and normal people, any of the normal taxes that we all pay. What we have pledged to do is to put an extra £3.7 billion into care. Because actually the problem with the NHS is not just that we've got crumbling hospitals and we've got difficulties getting a GP's appointment. We are not looking at the whole holistic journey between keeping people well in the first place, looking after them when they're in hospital, and then getting them out of hospital to someone who can look after them at the other end when they don't need to be in hospital anymore. If we can properly invest in care, it's actually investing to save, because you keep people in work, you get people out of hospitals where you're paying these extortionate extra fees for temporary nurses and where they're blocking the beds, and we actually can get people back into the economy, living healthier, happier lives, and we'll all be better off.
Thank you. The Labour Party has been very clear in our manifesto about what we can afford and what we can't. And it's all in the back there. You can look it up. How we're going to fund what we're going to fund. We're going to fund 40,000 new appointments in the NHS every week. We're going to fund kind of dentistry. We're going to fund the stuff that we can afford now. And the reason why we can't do everything that we would like is because the public finances have been trashed. And we know it. We've seen it. We've seen how run down our hospitals are. We've seen how run down our infrastructure is. So we are going to make promises we can keep, because the Labour Party is actually the party of fiscal responsibility. The Economist, the tome of economics in the world, came out and backed the Labour Party yesterday because they recognise that we have got fiscally sensible plans to recover from the mess that we've been handed. Hopefully we'll be handed. Well, not hopefully be handed, but you know what I mean. If Labour form a government, we will be handed a mess and we need to fix it. And we will do what we can afford to revive our NHS and to basically build back our country. Thank you very much.
So our national spend on the NHS is already nearly 50%. It's the highest. We increased it during the pandemic. We have increased it exponentially year on year. But we still have efficiency issues, and that's where I don't think when we increase the amount One, we're going to have to increase taxes to pay for it. And also, are we going to actually produce better services? I had a Westminster Hall debate on GP surgeries because I wanted to create an incentive, an incentive program for GPs to be able to get, an additional fund for seeing people in person or going to their house, just like they did for the COVID vaccine. It worked. They got additional funding for that, and giving them financial incentives to do what we all want them to do, rather than just pumping endless money in. We could pump it up to 75% of our national spend, and it wouldn't necessarily increase any efficiencies. We have to look at ways we can reward hard work and aspiration for our doctors and our nurses, and actually look at that approach moving forward, because this will not work in the long term. We have to look at how we can keep the NHS but make it efficient for the future.
Incidentally, a footnote for the previous discussion, reform is promising to eliminate interest on student loans. Despite record extra funding, in the recent years, NHS healthcare outcomes have declined. While still free at the point of delivery, our healthcare needs a major reforms to improve results and enjoy zero waiting lists. We are proposing that for healthcare workers to pay no tax for 3 years, so to address the shortages, and we're proposing to use the capacity of the independent sector to remove those waiting lists. We're promising to remove the waiting lists within 2 years. So it can be done. It's a management problem, and it will be done. I think that's all.
Thank you. Not sure how Nigel Farage is going to solve the problem of the NHS just by clicking his fingers, but anyway, that would be an interesting thing to watch. I do agree with John, though, that the NHS does need some kind of reform. I think there's an awful lot of wastage in the system, an awful lot. There's a big, thick middle management band that I think really needs addressing, auditing, and cutting. For example, a newly qualified nurse gets £28,500 salary. A diversity manager gets £91,000. Yeah, so it's a problem. Just going back to single-sex spaces, it's a problem in the NHS as well. Women need to be acknowledged, and their special sex spaces that they need in the NHS. They're being called cervix havers, uterus havers in NHS literature. I think this is dehumanising. It needs to be addressed and abolished, and women need the proper services they require from the NHS.
Well, my motto for the NHS is more funding, no improvement, because it's not going to improve with more funding. It needs reform. I agree with John, I agree with Pippa. And I'm actually glad that Anne actually pointed out regarding the issue of social care. We have this focus, haven't we, of continuously funding the NHS, sort out the NHS. The NHS isn't going to be sorted out until our social care is sorted out. So once we need to put more money into our social care so that we can resolve the issues within our NHS, which would then resolve the issues in our GP centres in our communities. It is a domino effect, and we need to stop looking at the middle section and start looking at the actual main sources of the problem, which is the social. We need to be encouraging people to come into the NHS, and that is potentially opening up a funding scheme to allow for new people who want to become a nurse and doctor to have the degree paid for by the government, with the agreement that they would work in the NHS for 5 years. Now, it's an idea, but it would encourage people to come in. But going on for wasting the NHS, you have photographers, you have social media managers that are paid a ridiculous amount of money, and £100 million in advertising costs each year. It needs to be cut. Yeah.
The next question is on poverty. It's quite a long question. Latest figures from the Trussell Trust charity reveal more than 3.1 million emergency food parcels were distributed by food banks in the UK-wide network in the past 12 months. the most parcels ever distributed by the charity in a year. It's an increase of 94% over the past 5 years. More than 1.1 million of these parcels were distributed for children. Measures the charity has recommended include scrapping the 2-child benefit limit and providing a long-term strategy and funding for local crisis support. Will the parties represented here tonight commit to introducing these measures?
Thank you to whoever put that question forward. Yes, it is in the Lib Dem manifesto that we have pledged to remove the 2-child limit on the benefits cap, and I think that's really important. We've also put in an aspiration to extend free school meals to all children in poverty, and then extend that to all primary school children when finances allow, because I also think it's really important when children are at school, they can get a decent meal, and that helps learning, and it's back to investing in our education and our communities again. But it's not just children that need support. We've also committed to protecting the triple lock on pensions, because pensioners are often struggling with the cost of living at the moment. And we believe that women born in the 1950s should be treated fairly and properly compensated for the changes to the pension age, because that has hit a lot of people very hard and it's simply not fair. Thank you.
It's really depressing that we're back here, actually. We made massive improvements under the last Labour government in cutting poverty rates. And then 14 years later, look where we are. I think it's a shame. And it's not just a shame in the abstract, it's real people, it's real lives. Labour, as I've said before, can only do what we can afford to do. That's hard, because I think most of the Labour Party would want to fix it all tomorrow, but we know we can't, because we've had fiscal irresponsibility in Liz Truss's budget. The economy has been trashed. We will do things, we will put feeding clubs into schools, introduce nursery places. We're going to build plans and strategies with local authorities to work better on reducing poverty. And do you know what? It's the kind of worst bit of our society that we've got kids that are too hungry to learn. We need to fix this. And I know that a Labour government will be 100% focused on growth so that we can start to fund the stuff that will lift people out of poverty, not just through programs, but through work and through aspiration as well. So, thank you.
So, I worked at the CSJ before I became an MP, and we were focused on child poverty, on helping young offenders and helping care leavers who were falling into the cycle of poverty and reoffending. When I first was elected, I worked cross-party with actually West Reading on a amendment to the domestic abuse bill. So I changed the law to allow for emergency need housing allocation for families fleeing domestic abuse. So women and children who didn't have housing, because we need to solve poverty, but we also need to solve housing for the most vulnerable. This is something I nearly lost the whip over because I wasn't allowed to sign amendments or speak in support cross-party, but it was so important to me. I had campaigned with Crisis before I was an MP, and I had campaigned and worked with them to get this amendment on the statute books. And one of the things I am most proud of is that I was able to change the law for something I campaigned before I ever became a member of Parliament. It's a small thing, but it does mean a great deal, because if we have housing, then we can solve food and we can solve family stability. And so that is something that is extremely important to me personally.
I might have mentioned before that we are broke, but we are. And the best way out of poverty is work. And the reform programme is to make work pay. So immediately increase the personal allowance to £20,000, which will then take people out of the trap which currently exists between benefits and and earning. So the benefits system needs reform. It's rocketed, the benefits bill has rocketed since COVID, and it's no longer really affordable. Thank you.
So, yeah, I believe this election is the living standards election, actually, because I don't believe the cost of living crisis is over. I think we've had poor economic policies from government. It's resulted in our national debt being tripled, highest taxes for 80 years, and the threat of even higher taxes if you know who come in. So, falling inflation hasn't eased the cost of living crisis with rents and mortgages, food bills, energy. Everything is going up and it's staying high at the moment. We need to address this. Before I stood as a candidate, I was CEO at Citizens Advice East Berkshire. So I'm very familiar with the Trussell Trust, and I worked in partnership with them to set up projects, putting our advisors in their food banks so we could actually help people at a practical level when they came into the food banks in crisis. It was a great success, unfortunately, but we rolled it out to other food banks, and it just shows what a real need there is. And I would support the Trussell Trust in what they are proposing, introducing an essentials guarantee and to tackle the 5-week wait for universal credit so people don't go into debt while they're actually waiting for their benefits.
Well, firstly, I think the 2-child limit, I disagree with that as well. But I think when it comes to poverty, it's an issue when you hit that poverty level, you feel like all options are not there for you now. Now, I've been in the housing market, and when people come up to you where they're on benefits because they are still looking for jobs and they can't get any, and they want support from the council and the benefit system, we shut them off because we don't want them. That is the housing market strategy. We want people who are working, and when you hit the benefit system, because you have to, because you're not working, because you're still looking for work, because you've been made redundant or you're in poverty, you've got no options out there because no one wants to help you. And we need to be looking at reforming the housing structure market, estate agents, rentals, and looking at that. And I agree, I think free school meals should be an option for a lot of children. I live by a primary school, and there's a lot of children who are hungry there, which I've spoken to teachers about. So we need to be looking at rolling in free school meals itself. Yes, thank you.
Perhaps Joy and your friends over here can just square a circle for me. Some of them maybe I just don't understand this. The Conservatives have been in power for 14 years. You're saying that you've done such a great job, but there are more food banks than cinemas. There are more food banks than libraries. 4.2 million children are living in poverty. How on earth is that a success?
Is on the small topic of defence, and we will be starting with Matt. Like many other people, I am concerned that the world is becoming a very dangerous place at a time when the UK's ability to defend ourselves is becoming increasingly limited. I would like to know how each party plans to improve our defence capability, and how will you pay for it?
So I've got quite a lot of experience in living in unstable places. I lived in Southeast Asia in a country called Burma during the Rohingya genocide. I've seen the impact of climate change in some of the countries that we've worked alongside. The world is a very unstable and insecure place, and it feels like that increasingly. Labour have been absolutely clear that national defence is one of our first priorities. It is our first priority alongside economic growth. You know, as I said earlier, we're proud that we helped found NATO in the first Attlee government. We have a long and proud tradition of kind of standing up for this country and for our interests. But that also means being kind of firm with our friends and our allies overseas. It means strengthening those relationships, not diminishing our influence. And on kind of spending, we have said that, and Joy will probably say, oh, Labour haven't committed to 2.5, is because we don't kind of make up numbers and just throw them into the election machine. We've been very clear. We will raise our spending on national defence to 2.5% when we can afford it, not by kind of matching up some money from cuts to something somewhere when they can find it. Thank you.
You took the words out of my mouth. I do believe this is the one area that I do believe we should increase spending, 2.5%. That's what the Conservatives have committed to. We need to defend our national capabilities. Defense of the realm is extremely important to me. And I support Trident. I support a nuclear deterrent. I believe in that if we protect our borders, we are going to protect the people within our borders. It is extremely important, and I would like to see Labour commit to 2.5%. If you care about defending our realm, I'd also like to see the deputy leader of the Labour Party agree to support Trident, because she voted against it in 2016 and still hasn't agreed to change her mind on it. So just putting that out there.
We support the 2.5% immediately and 3% within 6 years. Also a pay review for all armed services, and to introduce an armed services justice bill so the armed services are not constantly faced with litigation going on and on and on and on. We are living in a really dangerous world. We have a war in Europe which is might consume us, and we're singly incapable of protecting ourselves at the moment, let alone protecting each other. So defense should be a huge priority, and we must stop making it up. 100,000 in our armed forces is just not enough. The 30,000 which have been discussed should be full-time soldiers, sailors, and all airmen. We need the best kit and the best people, and we've got then a chance of defending ourselves. At the moment, we've got no chance.
Okay, a little known fact about me, I was a Navy wife. And have experienced life on the inside of the armed forces. I've lived in married quarters, and I've been left at home with 3 very young children while my husband was posted abroad. In fact, the morning that our first child was born, he had to go off and join his ship. So I know about the realities and the sacrifices that forces families go through. I do think they're underfunded, but again, I do think there's an awful lot of wastage in the system. I have lived behind the wire, as I said, in married quarters, and I saw the shocking waste that goes on in our forces. So I think, again, these things need to be audited incredibly carefully. But we are an island nation, and we do need defence, so we do need to ensure that we do get the proper funding. Just a point on mandatory conscription that was being bandied around by Rishi Sunak. I am totally against mandatory conscription. I think our young people have enough to worry about without being marched off to war against their will.
I'm glad defence has come up, actually, because I wanted to give this fact to you. I actually applied for the RAF, and I didn't get a response back 9 months later. 9 months, I got a response back. Now, that was for me to take a test. Now, we always hear, don't we, that recruitment is poor, we want you. They're not interested, because it's taken 9 months for you to contact me. Surely you don't have that many applications. And we can't defend ourselves. And I'm talking as a youngster here, and I'm sure there's youngsters here tonight that probably agree with me or disagree with me. Youngsters don't care. They don't want to defend the country anymore. They just want to sit on an Xbox all day. But we need to be looking at the point. We need to be proud, patriotic, and we need to defend ourselves. There are very big threats out there, and we hear it all the time. It's just a shame that there is a lot of waste in the military itself. I've managed to actually work with the RAF Air Cadets, which has got me into the RAF bases, and you see a lot of the wastage. It needs to be dealt with. But also, it's the #1 department that the government look to cut funding because they think it's not necessary. Thank you.
One of the primary question I don't think anyone ever answers is that why is the world a more dangerous place? Now, in a rare moment of honesty, the Tory defence spokesman said that one of the real dangers for the globe is climate change. There is currently a national land grab for vast areas of the globe of food production. If the 21st century was the century where war was caused by oil, the 21st century is going to be where food security is going to be the driver of global war. I don't have the answers. The people in power who are likely to be in power should be telling us why the world is more dangerous now.
So regardless of why we're talking about it, I absolutely agree that we are living in a very dangerous world right now. The Lib Dems would like to see the reversal of the Conservative Party's cuts to the armed forces, to reverse those and bring the regular troop numbers back up over 100,000. We're absolutely committed to maintaining our nuclear deterrent whilst pursuing multilateral global disarmament, because we can't be involved in that discussion unless we have the ability to protect ourselves. But we also need to keep our friends at NATO very close. We need to increase our defence spending in every year of the Parliament, and the Lib Dems are also aiming for the 2.5% of GDP that the other parties have mentioned. And alongside that, we absolutely need to also think about our veterans and secure a fair deal for service personnel, because far too often they are not well treated. Thank you.
Left. So now we're going to switch to a rapid response section where the candidates will only have 30 seconds to respond to the questions. So please try and stick to time, and then we can get through as many questions as we can in the remaining 15 minutes. The next question, and we'll be starting with Joy, is on river pollution. Thames Water and other companies have underinvested in the sewage system while taking huge dividends out of the business, resulting in pollution in our rivers. What would your party do to put this right?
We've created unlimited fines now for water companies. We can now revoke their license. We have strengthened the teeth of Ofwat so we can actually take away their powers. We have now 100% monitoring so we can see what is going in, and we have now started to impose those fines. I wanted to go even further and take criminal damage, but I was told not to say that in public, but that's how I feel. So, there you go.
The answer to this question is very simple. Thames Water should be allowed to go bust. All the shareholders and bondholders should lose their money, and it should be taken into public ownership. It's not worked, and it's never going to work, and the government would then get it for free.
Yeah, radical. I've talked about Thames Water already. I do agree with, the privatisation hasn't worked and it should be renationalised. But I think the way Thames Water's going, they're proposing, there was an article in the FT the other day, they're proposing a 59% rise on water bills, going from around £400 a year to £700 a year. That's what Thames Water have planned for us. We need to stop all these disastrous decisions they're making, and the shareholders raking it in.
Well, you might get your way, John, because I've heard the offices in Slough for Thames Water might be closing. But what we need to be, I've already really mentioned about rivers pollution, is we need to be giving environmental agencies more powers so that they can hold these water companies accountable. Obviously, changing Ofwat, giving more funding towards environment agencies, and then, we can then look at holding these water companies accountable for what they're pumping into our rivers itself.
Ready? Cool. Well, of course, we would take the water companies back into public ownership. We would make polluters pay. And we would take those responsible to the ICC and try them for ecocide. If they've killed a river, they should be on trial for ecocide.
I think I've already mentioned that the Lib Dem proposal is to turn the water companies into public benefit corporations. And this takes away the fact that they are currently obliged to answer to their shareholders. They should be answering to us. They should be answering to the public and delivering public benefit. So we would ban dividends and bonus payments to water company executives until they stop dumping sewage in our rivers. And to enforce that, we need a clean water authority that doesn't have the cosy relationship that Ofwat currently has with the water companies, but will actually hold them to account.
I grew up with these rivers, playing in them, on them, around them. My kids won't, because all they know is that Boris Johnson let poo get put in them. They're literally scared to play in the rivers that I grew up in. My brother doesn't take his kids out paddleboarding anymore on the Thames because they're scared of getting sick. We've said we're going to hold them to account, including criminal sanctions, taking away bonuses. My concern is the fever to take them into public ownership doesn't take them away from the shareholders, it lets the shareholders walk away. So I want to hold those companies to account so that they pay for the damage they've done, not let them scoot off at the end.
The next topic is climate change, and will be answered by John first of all. What is your party's timescale to get to net zero CO2 emissions, and how will you achieve this?
It's a bit appropriate, really, that I'm the first. Our timetable is not to achieve net zero. It's too costly, and we will never achieve it. And what we do doesn't make an iota of difference to the world at large. We're just impoverishing ourselves for nothing.
What about our children? Who are going to die?
Thank you. Yeah, my stance on climate change is that I watched how the pandemic was handled, and I saw how fear was used to manipulate people. I think the same thing is happening with climate change. I'm not denying climate change, but I think we need to be very careful that how we might be manipulated by fear and about being rushed into making expensive decisions and rushing in green taxes that aren't necessary.
Well, I don't really want to say this, but I will. I think the media, the corrupt media, plays a big role in scaring us in this climate change. I think we need to be sensible about a net zero. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have a net zero at all, but we are putting this deadline, which is scaring businesses, which is going to pressure businesses as well as councils and locals and government into reaching a target which is going to be very costly, and we have to put a net zero that's going to be more reasonable. I don't know what a figure would be, but the net zero we currently have in place will not work. It's going to cause a lot of issues and pressure on businesses, most importantly.
Well, I think the purpose of the targets is to put pressure on businesses to make a change. We don't have time to be careful. That's great. The PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, has estimated that 55% of global GDP is directly under threat from climate change.
So I absolutely agree. This is one of the biggest issues facing us at the moment, that we need to invest, otherwise we are going to end up with far higher costs if we do nothing. The Lib Dems have committed to reaching net zero by 2045, but that's acting now and hopefully getting there sooner. We'd like to see 90% of our power coming from renewable sources by 2030, which will allow us to actually save money and be less dependent on Russian supplies. And if we start doing things like insulating people's homes, then we will save people money, help with some of the cost of living issues, and actually save energy and reduce our carbon footprint at the same time. Thank you.
Thanks, John. This is such an opportunity for our country. Why have we been scared into think it's not? And it's such a risk for our country at the same time. I've worked with people whose islands are beneath the sea now because of climate change and the impact it's had. Stop letting people scare you about tackling climate change. There's 2/3 jobs Labour are proposing to produce to tackle this problem. We're talking about green energy so that we're not dependent on Putin. Whatever some political leaders might think about him, I don't trust him. So the Labour Party is absolutely committed to tackling this at every level. Thank you.
So I campaigned against the ULEZ because I understand the importance of these net zero targets, but not at the expense of normal working class people who are just trying to get from one part of the constituency to London, who are getting an additional tax and being punished for being car owners. I agree on the things that we need to tackle, but I also campaigned and was successful in getting the boiler tax scrapped and several other taxes and the electric car date pushed back. I actually was moved from the Department of Energy to another department because of my passion for making net zero targets actually a market-driven approach where people want to do it, but not at the expense of working class people who have to pay more at a time when we are already dealing with a lot of cost of living issues. That is why I want a practical approach to net zero, to take care of everyone in society.
Okay. Thank you. The next question is on the subject of vaping, and we'll go first to Pippa. This question was actually submitted by a 15-year-old. I am 15 years old, and I have lived in Beaconsfield my whole life. Vaping is a huge problem for people my age, and it's affecting many of my classmates. What measures would you take to prevent the selling of vaping around Beaconsfield?
Thank you. Yeah, I think we've all seen the switch from smoking to vaping, and we've all followed people down the street being enveloped in a cloud of vape, which is immensely unpleasant. I think it does need to be regulated. I wouldn't ban it necessarily. It's interesting that there's a lot of data coming out on how tobacco, in fact, isn't harmful, but it's the additives that have been put into cigarettes that are. So I think we need to bear that in mind when we're looking at regulating vaping. Thank you.
Well, I actually vape myself, so I feel like I'm the best person to talk about this. I think the biggest problem we have, and I'm against vaping, even though I do it, is on the basis of flavours. These companies, like Elf Bar, all these companies that provide these vapes, they're kind of looking to children of like, you've got cherry flavour, you've got kiwi flavour. We need to be banning the vapes and going to a traditional tobacco or methyl. It is very simple, and I'll show you. They're very colourful. That is also approachable to youngsters as well, and I feel like their target audience, it feels like it is pushing towards the youngsters, and I feel for the 15-year-old, just like myself, it is hard to get off it, because you end up doing it everywhere around the house, everywhere we want to go. It needs to be stopped and getting rid of it. I don't think an out ban is right, but getting rid of the flavours.
You know what? I absolutely agree with someone who's actually doing it, admitted it, and has an answer. That's it.
Thank you. The Lib Dem policy on this is that we would introduce regulations to prevent the dangerous use of vapes by children. There's no reason that we should be selling these products to young people. And as you say, the flavours, the colouring are all part of the problem. So the Lib Dems are also proposing the ban of the sale of single-use vapes, which are a huge problem with littering now. They're a single-use disposable plastic. They're appealing to children, and they're really not appropriate. But we do need to recognise that there is a role for stopping smoking, for using vapes in the way that they were originally marketed to help people get off a tobacco addiction.
So like Cole, I vape and I smoke sometimes occasionally. That just don't tell my wife. And we should absolutely be restricting these things. I've been addicted to nicotine for most of my life. It's stupid. I kind of think I'm clever, but I'm obviously not. I've smoked for 20, 30 years. This is ridiculous. We need to stop future generations getting hooked like I did. And so I really think that, we need to take every action we can to limit it. And actually, we want to have a hopeful future for our kids. We don't want to be them kind of being addicted to new and more exotic substances. So I'm really against the whole market, even though I fully admit that makes me a hypocrite. Thank you very much.
I abstained on the smoking ban, and I would abstain on the vaping ban because I believe in personal freedom and I don't want to be a hypocrite. So there we are.
I'm a libertine, and I believe that people should do what they want to do. But in this case, I'm more fearful of a black market in vapes, which introduce harmful substances to the vapes themselves. So I think they should continue to be sold but regulated.
Thank you, candidates. One final question, which will go to Cole first of all, and it's on priorities. Party first or constituents first? Would you take on the role of a whip? When it comes to voting in the chamber, which of your party's policies are you prepared to vote against when such a policy would cause detriment to your constituents? Sorry, Cole, do you want me to repeat the question?
No, that's fine. Don't worry. So I won't become whip or anything because I'm an independent. So I have no interest in supporting any political party within Parliament. So you'd have my full interest as a priority. But I think most importantly is different parts of the constituency have different problems. There's some problems that are united, like the sewage, housing, the green belt, but some are important on other issues than in Beaconsfield itself. But I think the main one would be to uphold Joy Morrissey if I was elected as MP to keep hold of the green belt, which is so obviously something that's a sell point in this community itself.
Well, the Green Party might actually get 4 people in. It's unlikely that I'm going to be one of them. But let's take hypotheticals. Of course, no, one of the privileges of not being in power is that you can represent the people. But the voice, of course, as I promised to say, was I'm going to be that nag person who's going to talk about the climate. I'm going to represent the people here who worried about their children. And if you're not as worried about your children, you can leave that to me, because I'll worry about them on your behalf.
So I'm finding this question slightly difficult because when I read the Lib Dem manifesto, I don't see it as being in conflict with the principles and the things that people in Beaconsfield care about. So I can't think of anything off the top of my head where I think that at the moment your views would not be aligned with the Lib Dem position, but I very much believe that the Lib Dems believe in localism, in representing local people. I am a local member of the community and I would want to represent the people here. Thank you.
I guess for me, it's a slightly different question, actually. It's community or party, because I'm from around here. I can't, move away. My brother's not going to suddenly decide that I'm kind of if I go against the community. So absolutely, I'd represent you. But also, I believe in a system that has to work to deliver stuff. And that means compromise. And compromise is hard, and it requires choice, and it requires decisions. And the Labour Party are absolutely committed to making those tough decisions. So that means that sometimes you might disagree with the decisions that I make, but we can have that conversation and we can try and work it out, and we might have to disagree. But ultimately, that's how you change things in the world, is by debate and by conversation and by trying to kind of work it out. And I'd much rather have that relationship with people here than kind of pretend that I'm something I'm not. So thank you.
So I said I would resign over a vote on the third runway at Heathrow. I committed to that and HS2, and I went into the whip's office knowing that. And just to be clear, there would be no change on the legislation on the bill of encroachment for house building targets and building for cooperations to stop Slough. That's because I threatened to resign over it. So you don't know what happens behind the scenes, but it's a lot worse when a government whip decides they're going to resign over an issue that matters locally. When you see an amendment that magically appears on a piece of legislation, it's probably because somebody behind the closed doors has said, this is it, I'm drawing the line, or I'm walking out. So you don't know what's happening, but if you've seen the amendment and you've seen the change for your local constituents, that's because of what I've done behind the scenes.
I am fiercely independent and always have been, and if privileged enough to be elected your MP, I would continue to be so and be governed by your wishes. If my three priorities would be those which have emerged through the conversations tonight, which is the Green Belt, schools and highways. Thank you.
I think the candidates that stand for the parties are being extremely naive. The whip system is real. And as an independent, this is a great question for me because the whip does not apply to me. Every vote would be a free vote. And as an independent, I'm often asked, what's your manifesto? What do you stand for? And the answer is, my manifesto is what's important to you. If I was elected, I would publicise upcoming debates and votes on my website and try and engage with constituents to see what's important to you and then vote accordingly. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. That brings us to the end of our questions. Thanks very much. I know you've had a very, very busy time recently, a few more days to go. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. Thank you to the candidates, and good luck to you all for the 4th of July. Thank you.